In 1912, the most famous ship in history served a 14-course dinner to first-class passengers on the same night it was sailing toward its own grave. Number 11 on this list was so extravagant that the ingredients had to be loaded in Southampton by a dedicated refrigeration team. Number 3 will make you deeply uncomfortable when you learn what was being scooped and served in the dining room while the iceberg was already on the radar. And number 1, the thing that actually killed more survivors than the cold water was not food at all. It was the absence of it. Hi, my name is Joseph, and this is Forgotten Old American. Number 25, hardtack and saltfish. Before you picture the crystal chandeliers, the white gloves, and the 7 forks, start here. In the third-class dining rooms below the waterline, passengers were eating hardtack, the same dense flour and water biscuits that Civil War soldiers had cursed 40 years earlier, the same tooth-dulling slabs that cowboys soaked in coffee just to make them chewable. Third-class passengers on the Titanic were mostly immigrants, Irish families leaving famine behind, Scandinavians chasing a new life, Eastern Europeans who had sold everything they owned for a ticket. They ate saltfish and hardtack, and they were grateful for it, because the alternative was the village they had left behind. The Titanic was not a luxury experience for everyone on board. For the people in steerage, it was the best meal some of them had eaten in months. Number 24. Oatmeal porridge. Every morning in third class began the same way. A bowl of boiled oatmeal porridge, served hot, plain, with maybe a scrape of margarine if you were lucky. A tin cup of tea sat alongside it. That was breakfast for the 870 passengers in steerage. The White Star Line was actually considered progressive in 1912 for feeding third-class passengers 3 meals a day at all. Earlier ocean crossings had required steerage passengers to bring their own food entirely. Oatmeal kept people upright. It provided slow-burning calories that sustained a body through a morning of sitting in a crowded below-deck common room with nothing to do but watch the Atlantic pass by a porthole the size of your face. Number 23, cabin biscuits. These were not your grandmother's biscuits. Cabin biscuits were a step above hardtack, a hard, dry, shelf-stable cracker issued to third-class passengers as part of their daily ration. They were packed in tins that could survive months at sea without spoiling. They were eaten with tinned butter or with jam on Sundays. Third-class passengers on the Titanic received them as a supplement to their meals, something to fill the gaps between the twice-daily hot servings. Food historians who have reconstructed the third-class menu note that the total daily calorie count was adequate by 1912 standards. Adequate. That word tells you everything. Adequate was what you offered people you expected to work fields and factories on the other side of the ocean. Number 22, boiled potatoes. If there was one food that united the third-class dining room on the Titanic, it was boiled potatoes. Plain, unadorned, salted with whatever was available. For the Irish passengers, especially, the boiled potato was both comfort and a cruel joke. Many of them had left Ireland because the potato had failed them. And here they were, crossing the Atlantic on the most famous ship ever built, eating a boiled potato for supper. The potato was cheap, filling, easy to prepare in bulk for hundreds of people, and required no skill to serve. The ship's kitchen staff could produce 800 portions of boiled potatoes with less effort than a single first-class sauce required. That math is not subtle. Number 21. Oxtail soup. Step 1, deck up into second class, and the food changed in ways that mattered. Oxtail soup was a staple of the second-class lunch menu. A thick, dark, deeply savory broth made from the tails of cattle, simmered for hours until the collagen released and the broth turned glossy and rich. By 1912 standards, oxtail soup was respectable working-class food. The kind of thing a bank clerk, a school teacher, or a traveling salesman would eat at a decent chop house in London. Second class on the Titanic was, by most accounts, equivalent to first class on almost any other ship sailing at the time. The passengers in second class did not know they were on the wrong deck. They thought they had arrived. Here is something the movies never explain. The Titanic had 3 completely separate dining rooms, kitchens, and food cultures operating simultaneously. First-class passengers ate in a room modeled after the Palace of Versailles. Second-class passengers ate in a room that would have been considered elegant in any hotel in England. Third-class passengers ate at long communal tables in a room below the waterline that smelled of engine oil and bodies, and the particular exhaustion of people who had traveled very far from home. The White Star Line published all 3 menus, and they survive today. Reading them side by side is one of the more quietly devastating documents in American maritime history. Number 20. Grilled mutton chops. Second-class dinner on the Titanic read like a proper Sunday roast. Grilled mutton chops appeared regularly, served with boiled rice and a vegetable alongside. Mutton was the workhorse of British cooking in the early 20th century. Cheaper than beef, tougher in texture, but richly flavored when cooked correctly. A good ship's cook could produce mutton chops by the hundred without breaking a sweat. For second-class passengers, who were mostly British, South African, and American middle-class travelers, mutton chops meant home. They meant Sunday. They meant the ordinary dignity of a hot plate set in front of you by someone who had been paid to cook it properly. Number 19. Curried chicken and rice. This one surprised me when I first read the second-class menu. Curried chicken appeared on the Titanic's second-class service, a nod to the British Empire's complicated relationship with Indian cuisine that had been filtering into English cooking for a century by 1912. The curry would have been mild by modern standards, thickened with flour and colored with turmeric, and served over boiled white rice. But for a ship crossing the North Atlantic in April, it was warm and aromatic and different. Different mattered when you had been at sea for 4 days. Second-class passengers ate better than most people eating in restaurants on dry land at the time. Number 18. Plum pudding. Second-class dessert on the Titanic included plum pudding, that dense, dark, steamed British institution, packed with dried fruit and suet, and doused in whatever spirit the cook had to hand. Plum pudding in 1912 was not a Christmas exclusive. It was a year-round staple of institutional British cooking, served in schools and hospitals and ships because it kept well, traveled without refrigeration, and was almost impossible to ruin. You could make it 3 weeks ahead and it would be fine. Better, even. The passengers who ate it on the Titanic may have eaten it without ceremony, scraping their bowls clean and asking for nothing. They had no way of knowing it was the last plum pudding some of them would ever taste. Number 17. Corned beef and cabbage. On Sunday evenings, third-class passengers on the Titanic received what was considered their best meal of the week. Salted beef simmered with cabbage until everything turned tender, and the broth ran deep, red-brown, and fragrant. For the Irish passengers in steerage, many of whom were traveling to Boston, New York, and Philadelphia to join relatives who had made the crossing before them, this meal was a preview of America. Corned beef and cabbage had already become the food of Irish America by 1912. They were eating their destination. Number 16. Smoked herring. Smoked herring appeared on the third-class breakfast rotation and nobody complained. Working-class Europeans in 1912 ate smoked fish for breakfast the way Americans later ate cereal. It was preserved, affordable, intensely flavorful, and required nothing from the cook except to put it on the plate. The Scandinavian passengers especially would have found smoked herring completely ordinary. The British passengers would have eaten it without comment. The Eastern European passengers would have recognized it from market days back home. Smoked herring was the food that needed no translation. Poverty has its own universal language, and smoked fish is one of its oldest dialects. Here is something nobody talks about when they discuss the Titanic's food. The head chef, responsible for first-class dining on the Titanic, was a man named Charles Proctor. He had overseen kitchens on White Star's other great ships. He knew that the passengers in first class were not just wealthy, they were the wealthiest people alive. John Jacob Astor IV was on that ship. Benjamin Guggenheim was on that ship. These were men who had eaten in every great restaurant in Paris, London, and New York. Cooking for them was not hospitality. It was an audition. Charles Proctor went down with the ship. He stayed at his post until the end. I think about that more than I probably should. Number 15. Consommé Olga. The first-class dinner on April 14, 1912, the last dinner served on the Titanic, began with Consommé Olga, a crystal-clear beef broth, clarified through a painstaking process of filtering and skimming until every cloud of fat and protein had been removed, left behind pure concentrated flavor in a cup. Consommé is arguably the most labor-intensive thing you can make in a kitchen. It requires hours of work to produce something that looks like nothing. A first-class passenger could drain that cup in 4 sips and not think twice about the work behind it. The labor of the kitchen was supposed to be invisible. That was the point. Number 14. Oysters. Fresh oysters were served on the half shell as one of the opening courses of the last first-class dinner. That means the Titanic's kitchen staff loaded live oysters in Southampton and kept them alive in tanks for 4 days while the ship crossed the Atlantic. Raw oysters in 1912 were a display of wealth as much as of food. They were cold, briny, and alive until the moment they hit the plate. They required handling by gloved staff, proper ice service, and lemon wedges cut to a specific size. First-class passengers consumed them without fanfare, the way you consume something you have always had. That casual relationship with extravagance is its own kind of historical document. Number 13. Poached salmon with mousseline sauce. The fish course on the last first-class dinner was poached salmon served with mousseline sauce, a hollandaise lightened with whipped cream until it turned cloud-soft and almost ethereal. Poached salmon in 1912 was a technical achievement on land. On a ship moving through the North Atlantic, it was a minor miracle. The salmon had to be perfectly fresh, poached to exactly the right temperature, plated without breaking, sauced at the last second, and carried from the kitchen to the table by a waiter in full uniform on a moving ship. Everything on a first-class plate was a small act of defiance against the ocean. Number 12. Filet mignon Lily. This was the centerpiece of the last dinner. Filet mignon Lily, beef tenderloin pan-seared and finished with artichoke hearts, foie gras, and truffle sauce. I want you to sit with that for a second. Truffle sauce. On a ship. In the middle of the Atlantic. In April of 1912. The truffles had been sourced in France and loaded in Cherbourg when the Titanic made its European stop. They were kept in conditions that would have challenged most restaurants on dry land. The passengers who ate this dish ate it 4 hours before the iceberg. Some of them never ate again. Number 11. Roast duckling with applesauce. If the filet mignon was the centerpiece, the roast duckling was the dish that made first-class passengers feel at home. Roast duck with applesauce was Sunday dinner in every great house in England. It was the meal that Edwardian families served when they wanted to signal abundance without ostentation. On the Titanic, it appeared as one of several meat options at the first-class dinner, which means that passengers could choose between multiple preparations of multiple proteins, each one executed to the standard of a Michelin-starred kitchen. The applesauce was made from scratch, not from a jar, not from a tin, from actual apples that someone peeled and cooked and passed through a sieve by hand. On the night of April 14, 1912, the first-class passengers of the Titanic sat down to a dinner of 11 courses. 11. The meal began at 7 in the evening and lasted until well past 10 o'clock at night. The ship struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., which means that some of the wealthiest people in the world were still digesting their foie gras, their roast duckling, and their truffle sauce when the hull began to tear. There is something about that timeline that no amount of historical distance makes comfortable. They ate magnificently. Then the lights went out. Number 10. Lamb with mint sauce. Alongside the duckling and the filet mignon at that last first-class dinner sat roast lamb with mint sauce. Classic, unfussy, and deeply English. Mint sauce in 1912 was made with fresh mint, vinegar, and sugar, bright and sharp enough to cut through the richnesses of roasted lamb. It is the kind of dish that anchors a meal, that reminds you of something older and simpler, even when everything around it is extravagant. There is a certain irony in the fact that the most English dish on the most famous ship in the world was heading for America and never arrived. Number 9. Punch romaine. This one genuinely shocked me when I first read it. Punch romaine was served as the 8th course of the last first-class dinner. It was a palate cleanser, a granita of champagne, rum, and orange juice, served between the meat courses to reset the tongue for what was still coming. On a sinking ship, 8 courses in, and they still had 3 more to go. Punch romaine required the kitchen to have made a frozen granita at sea in 1912, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the Titanic took its obligation to first-class passengers. The obsession with their comfort was total. Number 8. Pot de foie gras. Foie gras appeared as one of the cold supper options available to first-class passengers in the late evening, after the 11-course dinner. After all of that, if you wanted something before bed, there was foie gras on toast waiting for you in the a la carte restaurant on B deck. The foie gras had been sourced from Strasbourg, the traditional heart of French foie gras production. It arrived in terrines, sealed with a layer of fat to preserve it. It was served on thin toasted bread with a small glass of sauterne. People were eating this at 11:30 at night on April 14, 1912. Some of them were still eating when the crew began to notice the temperature of the water dropping. Number 7. Waldorf pudding was one of the dessert options at the last first-class dinner, a cold molded confection of apples, celery, walnuts, and cream. It was named for the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, the same hotel that John Jacob Astor, who was sitting in the first-class dining room on that very night, had helped finance and build. There is something almost unbearably circular about that. A man eating a dessert named after his own hotel on a ship he would never leave, 4 hours before the iceberg. History is sometimes too on the nose to be believed. Number 6. Peaches in chartreuse jelly. This was the dessert that food historians single out most often when they describe the excess of the Titanic's last dinner. Canned peaches suspended in a molded jelly made with chartreuse liqueur, unmolded tableside and served to passengers who had already eaten 10 courses. By the time this arrived, the meal had been going for over 3 hours. The champagne had been poured and re-poured. The conversation had turned to America and business and the speed of the crossing, and whether the Titanic would set a new Atlantic record. Nobody was thinking about icebergs. The peaches sat in their green jelly and glittered under the chandelier lights, and nobody thought to wonder what was outside in the dark water. Here is what the survivors remembered. Not the filet mignon, not the oysters, not the truffle sauce. They remembered the smell of the bread. Lifeboats full of people in evening dress and third-class nightgowns, floating in water that was 28 degrees, remembered the smell of bread coming from the ship's bakery as it slipped beneath the surface. The bakery on the Titanic ran 24 hours a day. The ovens were still going when the bow went under. Survivors in Lifeboat 6 reported smelling fresh bread on the water for 20 minutes after the ship disappeared. I have thought about that detail for years. The last thing the Titanic gave the world was the smell of something baking. Number 5. Cocoa and coffee. Every morning on the Titanic in all 3 classes, the day began with a hot drink. In first class, it was coffee pressed through a silver service with heated cream. In second class, it was a decent ground coffee served in a proper cup. In third class, it was cocoa, thick and slightly sweet, made with condensed milk and boiling water. That cocoa was the one moment of every day when third-class passengers received something that felt like comfort rather than sustenance. A hot, sweet cup of something in the morning on a ship crossing the North Atlantic in April is not a luxury. It is a mercy. Every class on that ship got that mercy. That is worth noting. Number 4. Fresh baked bread. The Titanic's bakery operated continuously, around the clock, because feeding over 2,000 people 3 meals a day requires an industrial volume of bread. Third class has received a dense white loaf, adequate and filling. Second class received rolls served warm at dinner. First class received bread that had been shaped by hand, glazed with egg, and baked to order for individual tables. The same ingredient, flour and water and yeast, produced 3 completely different experiences depending on which deck you were eating on. The bread was the clearest illustration on the entire ship of how the same basic human need could be met in ways that were either generous or merely sufficient. There is a lesson in that, somewhere, that we still have not fully learned. Number 3. Ice cream. First-class passengers were served ice cream as one of their dessert options on multiple evenings of the crossing. This is the detail that gets me every time. The Titanic was surrounded by one of the densest iceberg fields ever recorded in the North Atlantic. The lookouts in the crow's nest had been warned about ice. The wireless operators had received ice warnings from other ships throughout the day of April 14th. The ocean was full of ice. And in the first-class dining room, under the chandeliers, waiters in white gloves were scooping ice cream into chilled silver dishes and setting them in front of passengers who had already eaten 10 other courses. Nobody was thinking about the irony. The ice cream was very good. Number 2. The last breakfast. On the morning of April 15, 1912, after the ship had struck the iceberg and begun to sink, the Titanic's kitchen staff continued to work. They served breakfast. Third-class passengers who made it to the dining room that morning were given porridge and bread. Second-class passengers who came down were served eggs and bacon, not because anyone had forgotten that the ship was sinking, but because the kitchen staff understood that their job was to feed people, and people who might be facing the North Atlantic in a lifeboat needed something in their stomach. The cooks stayed at their stations. They served breakfast on a sinking ship. I do not have a joke for that one. Number 1. Water. The lifeboats that left the Titanic on the night of April 14 and April 15, 1912, were stocked with emergency biscuits. They were stocked with flares. Most of them were stocked with oars and emergency lamps. What most of them were not adequately stocked with was fresh drinking water. Survivors who spent hours in lifeboats in freezing temperatures, soaked and in shock, reported desperate thirst before the Carpathia arrived. The richest woman in the world and the poorest immigrant from County Cork were equally thirsty in those lifeboats. The ocean surrounded them with water they could not drink. The ship that had served oysters and truffle sauce and 14 courses to its wealthiest passengers left its survivors with almost nothing to drink. That is the real last course of the Titanic, the one nobody ordered. Make one of these this week. Make the curried chicken from second class. Make the oxtail soup. Make the corned beef and cabbage the Irish passengers ate on that last Sunday evening, not knowing it would be their last. Sit down at the table when you make it. Set a place. Eat it slowly. Because the Titanic was not just a disaster, it was a dinner table that told the whole truth about who mattered and who was merely adequate. And the truth it told in 1912 is still being told today in every kitchen where someone makes do with what they have and calls it enough. Share in the comments which one you are going to make. I want to know if anyone is brave enough to attempt the consommé Olga. I want to know if the corned beef and cabbage hits different when you know who was eating it and where they were going. Because these were not just meals. They were the last thing 2,224 people tasted before the world changed. Some of them ate magnificently. Some of them ate adequately. All of them were hungry in the end. Remember that the next time you sit down at a table with people you love, the meal matters. The company matters more.